Welcome to the Radical Rhythm Podcast. This has been created for those of us that love radical women who live perhaps by the rules, but also question and challenge the status quo. We want more from our lives, to enjoy our sexuality, to explore radical thought, and to celebrate women who have lived and continue to live unconventional lives. Hi, I'm Dr. Toni Bear, sexologist, educator, activist, and definitely a radical woman. Thank you for joining me as I share stories of women challenging the status quo and living life to the fullest. Join me as we unapologetically march to the beat of a different drummer together. Welcome to the 7th episode of Radical Rhythm. This podcast is designed to talk about radical thought. And radical just means out of the ordinary, not ordinary, unusual. And rhythm is all about the movement. It is about the beat, specifically the heartbeat. So, Radical Rhythm Podcast is essentially about the unordinary rhythm of life and a sharing of ideas, especially about women who march to the beat of a different drum. Well, episode 7 features me. This is the first time that I'm telling my story on this podcast, and I have many more stories to share. If you like this story and you like my storytelling, would you please comment underneath this YouTube or podcast episode to encourage me to do this again? So, this is the story, episode 7 of The Snake and of sacred sexuality. Now, there are 4 parts to this story. My evolution and transformation in sacred sexuality indeed had 4 parts, and I'd like to share them with you. Initially, the story has to start with number 1, fear. I had so much fear of snakes, and I still have a respectful fear of snakes. And my parents told me that from the earliest age in the crib, I would have nightmares and scream. And when I had words, I told them that there was a snake in the bed with me. Now, that would be impossible. And we lived in Philadelphia, we moved to suburban Philadelphia. There were no snakes, at least none that I've ever heard of where I lived. So it wasn't that I saw a snake and was fearful. I was born with the fear of snakes. At least that's what I thought. Well, you and I both know that children are not born with fears. So that fear had to be instilled upon me. I did see a snake, and a snake indeed was with me from the earliest age through my entire life. And I'm now 58 years old. So this snake, and the snake looks different at different times, this snake has been traveling with me since the beginning of my time. My ex-husband, I'm just going to skip way ahead here. My ex-husband in my early 20s told me that I would wake up and scream that a snake was in bed with us. And he told me he couldn't tell me that the snake was not there. Indeed, I saw it. He had to tell me that he took care of the snake, and the snake now is no longer there. And I believed him, and I'd go back to sleep. Again, there was no instance where I ever saw a snake in real life. And if I did, it was from a very healthy distance. It was maybe in a science class in middle school, and there was nothing to be fearful of. So, this first step, all the way through my early years, my teens, my 20s, was this fear of meeting the snake. Now, there indeed was an intervention. Um, I would say that it started with meeting a shaman and learning from her and studying with her and opening up my mind to different dimensions, understanding that sometimes in life, or in the world or in the universe, there is more than what is in front of us. Now, I grew up Catholic, and I knew there were angels. I knew there was a God, a Trinity, saints, etc. And that was my belief system. But you see, I moved to Salt Lake City. And Salt Lake City really, as a place, really doesn't have a place in this story. However, something happened. And I still, to this day, cannot tell you what happened. All I can tell you is that I felt something greater than myself. And it visited me, and it was spiritual. Now, the only words I had at the time was angel, that angels visited me. And I started reading. I started reading because I'm a scholar. I started reading about Taoism and Buddhism and Native American spirituality. I started reading about every spiritual tradition that I could get a book to read to understand maybe what this was that exactly came to me. There was no message and there was no communication. It just was there, and I knew it was there. Well, from my 30s into my 40s, I truly understood that there was a spiritual sense to myself, that I had some kind of intuitive knowing to something greater than myself. Maybe you have that same feeling and that same knowing. And I started doing spiritual retreats for women and mostly friends of mine. And we would get together and go on retreat. I would share some of the shamanistic practices that I had learned from my friend. And, everyone practiced their own kind of spirituality. And the second major event that happened to me, or maybe didn't happen to me, it occurred, was at one of these spiritual retreats. I had a sexual experience with another person who had really no background in same sex love. And we had a sexual experience in that spiritual retreat, in that place, with that divine connection that was all around us in spirit and positive energy. We had a sexual experience that really couldn't be defined. I never had an experience like that. And she said afterwards, "What was that?" And I said, "I don't know." And she explained how there was a feeling in her root chakra, in her core, that just traveled up her spine and just ignited her brain out the top of her head. And she exploded not just into orgasm, but into something divine. And as I looked up what this possibly could be, I came across, and this is the second instance of the snake, the Kundalini. If you have a chance, read about Kundalini sexuality and how, if you are in tune with your body and your mind and spirit, how you can have a sacred sexual experience. Truly, truly amazing. So that was my second instance, and it wasn't a snake per se, but it definitely was some kind of divine intervention. As time went on and I studied more, I started feeling, well, I started journeying as a shaman on my own accord. And I would visit places that had a Mayan kind of feel. I don't know. I am not Latina. I'm Italian and Celtic. So I have no direct ancestry to Central America. It doesn't make sense. But what came to me was the goddess Ishel. And she has a huge snake headdress. And she is the mother goddess, the mother of fertility. And I studied about her and I just really connected with her and the snake and the Quetzalcoatl of the Aztec. And lo and behold, here comes event number 3. I meet a woman that I will eventually marry. And in our first conversation, after being in a highly charged sexual environment, was about the island of women off the coast of Cancun. And at the very same time, we said to each other that night that on the island of women is the temple of Ishel. And I said, I always wanted to go there. And she said to me, I go there every year. That's where I go to lay on the beach and enjoy the weather. And I go on vacation, sometimes by myself, sometimes with someone that I'm dating at the time. And we instantly had a connection. And that connection was over Ishel. And Ishel has a headdress of a snake. Now, all of this time, up until that point, I had the nightmares of the snake. And the snake was following me. And something had happened that stopped the nightmares before I met my future wife. And I was at the Dance of Naraya. Now, this is a group of people that do an outside dance, a 3-day celebration, and a Native American tradition. And I was invited by a friend to go. He was like an apprentice medicine man. And when I went to the dance, and Lord knows I had no idea what a dance was, I went there because I liked Jeff. So I went out to Oregon to camp, and the place was covered with rattlesnakes. Now, I didn't see a rattlesnake. I would just hear that there was a rattlesnake down at the porta potty or the outhouse, or there was a snake sighted on the path on the way to where I was tenting. And I went into a panic, an absolute panic. And I wanted to get out of there. I could not wait to get out of there because it was the most frightening situation I ever had. I was in the woods by myself. My friend Jeff was somewhere, and there were snakes, and there were rattlesnakes, and they are lethal. So I got up really early in the morning. Now, I have to tell you, I needed to protect myself all night in my little pup tent by myself. And I put signs, Reiki signs, on all the sides of the inside of my tent for protection. And I would unzip just a little bit of the tent and I would put a stick through and I would tap it around before I opened the tent to go outside to even, pee in the morning. I was petrified, absolutely petrified. That morning, I got up and I was going to leave. I was just going to leave Jeff a note. I had to get out of there. I was in a tizzy. I had snakes chasing me in my mind. And at this dance of the Naraya in the morning, Jeff was still sleeping. And I went down to the cafeteria section, mind you, with some really big sticks. And I was poking the grass everywhere. And I went down to the main kitchen at the camp and had a cup of coffee. And I was beside myself. And an older man walked up to me and said hello. And I've never seen him before. And he said, "How are you?" And I decided, to be absolutely honest and told him the story about the snakes and how I was petrified and how I had to leave. I had to get out of there. And he said, "Let me tell you a story." He said, "Once upon a time, there was a person that was in a field, walking across the field, and there was a snake behind them. And the man started running. The person was a man. And he started running away from the snake. And the snake slithered faster and faster. And the man ran faster and faster. And finally, the snake is catching up to the man, and the man trips and falls. And the snake comes right up to him. And the man says, "Just eat me. Go ahead. Just eat me. I know it's over." And the snake said, "Eat you?" He said, "Brother, I've come to you with a message. And I've been chasing you your whole life because I have a message to give you." And the gentleman that was telling me the story in the campground said to me, he said, "The snake has been in your life from the beginning because it has a message for you. And if you see a snake while you're here this weekend, just stop, look at the snake and say, 'Brother, what message do you have for me?'" That's it. That's been the secret my entire life, is that there was a message, and there is a message that a snake needs to give me, and I've been running away from it my whole life. And the first time I embraced the idea is with that Kundalini experience. And the second time I embraced that idea was when I met my wife to be, the love of my life, who I've been with it for a decade now. I have never had a relationship with anyone that has lasted that long. So now that I don't run away from the snake, I get to receive the message. I get to enjoy my sexuality. I get to celebrate my sexuality for the very first time. And I could tell you many, many more stories, but not today, about being a survivor of sexual abuse, being someone who has experienced domestic violence, and someone who has not celebrated their sexuality, someone who has been afraid of their sexuality their whole life. And when everything changed for me was that story of the snake at the dance of Naraya. It was the embracing of the sexual experience with that person one time in a special situation, without romance and without a relationship, but it worked. And it let me know that there is a divine connection that we can reach through sexuality that one might not experience in any other way. So the snake has been very special to me. It is a symbol of transformation. And if you're watching this on YouTube, I'm going to put this up. I'm going to bring a snake on. Don't freak. Okay. I still don't do live snakes. But when I was at the Carter Johnson Leather Library last time, and you might have seen previous episodes with Vi Johnson, Vi gifted me this cobra. This cobra is actually a whip. It's a cobra whip. I'm holding it up here on YouTube. And I know now I was not afraid. I was not afraid. Um, it's the first time I've ever held a snake. Now, mind you, I was 58 years old, right? And you know, what does the snake represent to me now? What does this guy represent? Um, he represents my transformation. And the fourth part of this progress that I've made from fear to ecstasy to spirit of Ishel and the goddess is now with this guy. I'll put him back down just in case you're afraid. Is now about wisdom, is about being open to the wisdom of the universe that is available and readily shared with me when I'm open to receiving the message. And this is my story of the snake. I hope you've enjoyed it. I do think sometimes if we are so fearful of something, there's probably a reason. Well, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed my story. And please Don't let anybody dim your shine. Don't let fear hold you back. And please join me for future episodes of the Radical Rhythm podcast and also maybe in a workshop. Oh, please check it out. I'll be introducing some to you in the music in a few minutes. Have a good week. Thank you for listening to the Radical Rhythm podcast today. It has truly been my pleasure to invite guests and talk to you about my passion, the joy in our sexuality, and radical women who march to the beat of a different drum. If you'd like to work with me, Dr. Toni Bear, I have a community where I give seminars every month. I also have a coaching program, both group and individual, and also a course, a self-directed course, because it's all about experiencing the joy life has to offer. I'd love to work with you. Check out my link below, www.tonibearedd.com. I'd love to see you next week for another broadcast, but in my group, we can work together to transform our lives to experience the joy life has to offer. See you next week, and don't let anyone dim your shine.